In a new £700 million drive, the government are pledging to rid the country of illegal drugs and break up 2,000 county line drug trafficking gangs. The crackdown will also commit to a large investment in treatment and recovery.
The Crime and Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse, joins us from Westminster. Very good morning to you, Mr. Malthouse. No one's going to argue with the fact that you want to crack down, for instance, on county lines gangs. What are the key proposals for trying to stop them operating?
So unusual for Martin to get a number wrong. It's actually £900 million we're going to be spending over the next 3 years, bringing our overall spending to about £3 billion. And we're going to be concentrating broadly in three areas. The first is, as you rightly say, Susanna, on supply. Over the last 2 years, we've built a really good model of operation of taking down county lines. Taken down about 1,500 now, 7,500 arrests. Importantly, rescued about 4,000 young and vulnerable people involved in the drugs industry. We want to turbocharge that effort over the next 3 years. So we see the end of that particular model, as well as looking at the more sophisticated, if you like, overseas organised criminal gangs who are bringing drugs into the country, really suppressing supply as much as we possibly can.
OK.
Alongside that, just to say, obviously, we've got about 300,000 heroin and crack addicts in this country who are driving about 50% of acquisitive crime, burglary and robbery in the country. We need to make sure that they're punished for their crimes, but also treated so they don't do it again. And we'll have about over £500 million spent in the health service to make sure that they'll have treatment, and £120 million spent in the prison service, so that as they go through prison and come out, we make sure that they are treated as well. And then the third area is obviously those unthinking users of drugs on a lifestyle basis, whose behaviour we need to change, because they are driving a lot of the misery and violence too.
How many of those are in Parliament? And I don't say that glibly, because reports in the Sunday Times at the weekend say that the Commons Speaker is going to be calling in the police because of claims drug abuse is rife in Parliament. Sniffer dogs. Claims that one former MP put their drug dealer on the payroll. I mean, you must have... you're wincing as I say it. I'm wincing as I say it.
No, I am. Well, look, we have several thousand people who work on the parliamentary estate, and obviously they reflect society at large. We had this inquiry run by Dale Carroll-Black over the last couple of years looking at drugs, and she estimated number of drug users in the country at about 3 million. That therefore wouldn't surprise me that there might be some people either on or off who are taking drugs, and it shows how prevalent it is. And it just shows also how we have to focus on this issue. I mean, one of the appalling stats that came out of her report was that over a third of 15-year-olds are saying that they're exposed to drugs at a young age. Now, this is something as a society that we have to address. It's going to take a long time. That's why the Prime Minister committed to a 10-year strategy and to really good resources and funding to attack, as I say, both supply, ruthlessly attack supply, but also demand, and make sure that we drive that down as well.
People will think, get your own house. I mean, literally get your own house in order. I mean, it slightly reflects this idea there's one rule for you, one rule for everybody else. We look back to a year ago when there are these claims that there was a party at number 10 Downing Street in contravention of the rule at the time, which said no office parties. London was in tier 3. Nobody was allowed to do any social gathering. But apparently 40 or 50 people got together for a gathering, and we're constantly told, oh, it's all right, we were doing it by the rules. No one can understand under what rule you were able, or they, not saying you, I don't know if you were there, were able to do it.
So if there was an event, on the drugs thing, I completely agree with you about the same rule that should apply. And one of the things we want to make sure as we design this new system, and we'll be publishing a white paper next year, is that the police have as much interest, if you like, in putting a sniffer dog outside Westminster Tube as they do outside Tottenham Hale, or they have as much a need to do a drugs operation on the Wirral in Merseyside as they do in Liverpool city centre, because the usage is more widespread than had previously been thought. And so driving that behaviour down is critical, because there is a very violent and horrible logistics operation bringing, for example, cocaine from South America into the UK and then distributing. Lots of people die, lots of people are enslaved by it, and yet there are people casually using it thinking they're not connected to that awful horror. We need to connect them to it in a meaningful way, and that's what we'll be laying out next year. In the interim, in the beginning, though, we want to concentrate on those heroin and crack users in particular who are driving so much acquisitive crime and get the numbers down. Look, without fraud and online stuff, crime over the last couple of years down about 14%. We really want to drive it down even further, and that means dealing with this drugs problem on a long-term basis.
We have to crack down on fraud too, but I'll save that for another day. There's a couple more subjects we want to talk to you about. Let's get on to Arthur Lavinia Hughes. The tragic story of the young 6-year-old who was tortured and lost his life by his father and his father's partner. I just want to play you a clip of somebody we had earlier today talking about social services, somebody who works in that sector and represents them, about what they suggested the grandmother should do. Have a listen to this, please. I think we have the clip.
Grandmother. If that photo, if she's taking the photo, and I don't want to, because she will be struggling and suffering enough, but my plea for anyone out there that's concerned about a child where there's visible bruises, seek medical intervention, and that will trigger an assessment.
So I know you used to be in charge of social services at Westminster Council, and the push there is saying social services isn't the prime place to go. You need to go to medical intervention. And we've been swamped. I had this tweet sent to me on this. I've known and reported a child in an at-risk home. So did many others. It took a year for social to do a home visit during lockdown. It became serious enough and my friend took the child into her home to keep us safe because social would not do anything. The system is a joke. Is the government doing enough? Are you going to take this seriously enough? Are we going to resource social services and make sure training is good enough that we don't have to tell people not to call social, go to the blooming doctors?
Well, to be honest with you, Martin, the whole system should be sensitised to this issue, whether medical or otherwise. Now, for example, my middle child many years ago had an accident in the garden. I had to take him to accident emergency. As part of that accident emergency assessment, I know, because I saw the form, that he was assessed as to whether there'd been any kind of abuse as part of that incident. There obviously hadn't. It was an accident in the garden, but the system should be sensitised. And what we want to do carefully is to have an inquiry at 2 levels. First of all, into the horrible case, the specifics of that case, to see what happened and whether there were specific failings in that case that could and should have been addressed, and then more widely review the system to see whether there are systemic problems that we need to address as well. I mean, over the years, and you rightly referred to my history of Westminster, then we had the Victoria Climbié case, which brought about huge changes in the child safeguarding system. In between, we've had others, Baby P. Now we've got this case. We have to constantly learn about the system and try and reinforce it and reassure ourselves. But the first thing to do is to work out whether there was a specific failing, either by the specific system there or individuals, or a general failing in the system. And it's too early to say at the moment. What you want, though, I hope, from government, and what you will get, is a dedication to working out what happened in this case. We've all been appalled by that. I get a lot of horrible stuff over my desk, right? But even I found that case incredibly hard to read. It was horrific, and we all have a moral duty to learn from it.
If I can ask you a practical question, though. We had Wendy Thorogood, who spoke. She's the director of the Association of Child Protection Professionals, effectively saying that if you were a grandparent in that same situation, you should look for medical intervention first ahead of social. She said as well as social services, because medical intervention would speed it up. As a government minister, what would you suggest anybody worried there about a child now? What would you suggest that they do? What is the official thing we should be looking at?
Well, as I say, I would report it into the authorities who are most available. If that's the medical, then great. If that's social services, then there too. But I would make sure that they're getting a reaction and follow-up from the case, that it's not just a fire and forget. Right? We all have to be sensitised to this issue. We all have to keep an eye out for our kids. It's a collective responsibility for all of us. And I think that relatives and what have you are best placed to be able to do that.
Very, very briefly, Minister, we were told that it would be the 18th of December when we would hear what's happening with Christmas. That's now, we've heard that's being brought forward. I know you won't tell us what's going to happen at Christmas. Can you tell us when we will be told what the rules are? What is the date?
So the Prime Minister put in place these restrictions for 3 weeks. That was a week ago. So in 2 weeks' time, they'll be reviewed, and then we'll be able to look forward to what's happening.
The Sun's reporting today.
Well, you've got one on me then. I'm assuming it's the 3 weeks. Things are changing, But that's changing in the light of the research that we're doing on the virus. As you know, we've got world-leading scientists in this country. That virus has gone off to Porton Down near Salisbury to be assessed and tested so we can work out how easy or difficult it's going to be for us to cope with. There's some restrictions have been put in over the next couple of weeks just to buy us a bit of time. But the general view at the moment is go ahead with your Christmas. Make sure, if you can, that you get tested, wear masks in retail and public transport situations. And obviously there's some testing restrictions on travel. But that's to buy us time when we work out what this virus is capable of, and then we'll be able to give some more news in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you for coming on and answering our questions today. It's appreciated.